Thank you to the patrons for supporting the channel. Welcome back. Today, thanks to the amazing support of the last one of these videos, we're doing a retrospective on Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Let's get started. Now, unlike the first game, which was relatively unknown and made by a relatively unknown developer at the time of release, this game was a hype machine, people dubbing it the scariest game ever.
You guys were practically begging me to play this again, and I'm glad you agree that this is probably one of the scariest games I have ever played.
And so when that first teaser showed up on scottgames.com, all hell broke loose. In total, there were 5 teasers for this game, and let's look at them individually. With the file name FNaF 2, it couldn't be more clear. There was a second game. With the reveal of what I think is the best iteration of Freddy, the community was released into a frenzy. Another thing to note about this is the 2015 release date. That was inaccurate. Here we have the reveal of Toy Bonnie and Withered Bonnie. This began the real theorizing. Why are there new animatronics? Who brought them back? Another thing to note is the names Toy and Withered were not used at this point. From my memory, the new animatronics were called the 2.0 animatronics, Bonnie 2.0, Foxy 2.0. Speaking of Foxy, another character reveal, the Mangle, at this point known as either Foxy 2.0 or Miss Foxy. And so began the Mangle gender debate. Dear God. Here we have the first hint at gameplay in one of these teasers. And even though the main thing everyone was talking about was the mask, this is also the reveal of the flashlight mechanic. And so began the tradition of, bro, increase the brightness and contrast on the image. And it was also the reveal of one of the most pivotal characters in the entire franchise, the puppet. And then there was the trailer, opening with a chorus of children singing London Bridge and a reveal of Withered Bonnie to the voice of a phone guy who, for all intents and purposes, at that point had been killed in the last game. And for those who know, he was. Every aspect of this trailer was combed through for theories, from the singing actually being reversed message of might kill all, to the drawings on the walls, to Foxy's jump scare at the end being the words freedom. Almost all of these theories were false, except for one concerning the phone guy call, which we'll get into later. Aside from the theories, this is just an excellent, example of how Scott Cawthon uses his 3D modeling experience to create a really good trailer. The lighting, the music, the pacing, everyone was ready for the second installment, even if they would have to wait until next year. But luckily for them, they wouldn't have to wait that long, because on November 11th, 2014, the second game was released, completely ahead of the original 2015 release date. So the gameplay. Where Five Nights at Freddy's 1 was built almost exclusively on using the 2 doors, there was a lot more to keep track of in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, and that's even aside from the fact that there is literally twice the characters. First off, there's no doors, nothing to close them out. So instead, you use 2 new options. Putting on the Freddy Fazbear mask to fool the animatronic facial scanners, or the flashlight to disorient or reset the animatronics. So let's start with the gameplay loop. In general, you'll be going through a sequence of 4, especially in the later nights. Wind up the music box to keep the puppet at bay, drop the mask to trick any animatronic near you or in your office, check the hallway and the vent lights, and repeat. It's a fairly simple gameplay loop, but I think it's the best in the whole series. Every piece has a purpose, from the light to the mask to the camera, and you need to use them quickly and expertly to actually survive. Now, a lot of people have a problem with this game's gameplay because it's a lot more RNG based, and I understand that. The skill cap and the random chance that's thrown into it makes it a lot less accessible and way harder in later nights. I think this is the reason in the FNaF World trailer classified the second game as Panic. It's harder, it's faster, and it's way more random. But let's talk about the pieces that actually make the gameplay loop work, the characters. For me, there's 2 types. There's vent and hallway characters, and then there's special characters. These characters include Withered Bonnie, Withered Chica, Withered Freddy, and all the toys. These characters move through the cameras, getting closer in either your left or right vent or hallway, and then come into your office, either standing in your office for a moment or just jump scaring you outright. When they appear either right outside your office or in your office, you use the mask to fend them off. If you're not fast enough, then too bad. While they differ slightly in animation, like Toy Bonnie, in general these characters act very similarly, just coming from different paths. These characters include the Marionette, Balloon Boy, Withered Foxy, the Mangle, and Golden Freddy. The Marionette, aka the Puppet, a soon-to-be very important character in the series, hides inside this present box in camera 11. There's a button that you must hold down to keep a music box wound up. If it runs out, the puppet begins its own little chime, and then jump scares you a few seconds later. You can keep track of the box with this timer circle, or by the blinking warning indicator. Withered Foxy is not fooled by the mask. He'll appear in the hallway, and you have to flash the light on him to reset him. Balloon Boy moves through the vent and is fooled by the mask just like the others. However, he doesn't jump scare you. When he gets into your office, he disables your light, making him a great, or I suppose terrible, combo with Withered Foxy. There's no way to get rid of him, so make sure you don't let him in. The Mangle works interestingly because she has many different mechanics. If you see him in the hallway, you use your flashlight like Foxy. If you see her in the vents, use the mask. And finally, there's the screen where he's on the ceiling. Here, it's just up to luck because she can jump scare you at any point. So like Balloon Boy, it's best to just keep him out of the office. And Golden Freddy. Unlike in FNaF 1, Golden Freddy isn't just an Easter egg, although there are plenty of those in this game. In this game, Golden Freddy even has a setting in Custom Night. He doesn't appear until Night 6 or Custom Night, and his gameplay is pretty simple. If you see him either lying in your office or his ghostly head in the hallway, put on your mask right away until he disappears. Despite being a lot more complex than the first game and a lot more RNG based, to me, I think it's the most effective and best one in the whole series. Everything just feels snappy and all of the mechanics have a purpose. The audio in FNaF 2 is probably the most iconic part about it. From the jump scare, to the ambience, to the buzzing that plays when an animatronic enters your office, to the horror sting that plays whenever something is in your hallway. Now, much like the first game, there are a lot of audio cues that are important to the actual gameplay, but unlike the first game, there aren't as many red herrings or fake-out audio pieces. Everything in the second game is connected directly to gameplay. For instance, whenever an animatronic is in your hallway or is getting close, that little horror music loop plays. In early game, it's a great way to keep track of where the animatronics are in relation to you, or if they've moved up. However, in later nights, the sound is pretty much going on continuously. Mangle, Balloon Boy, and the Marionette all have sounds tied directly to them. Whenever time is run out, the Marionette plays music letting you know that the music box is over, and you only have a few more seconds before you get jump scared. Mangle's distorted radio sound does act as an interesting uniqueness to the character, but it also gives you an auditory cue as to what character they're in, and when they enter your office. Balloon Boy's classic, "Hello? Hi," tells you when he's moved closer. And you definitely know when he's in your office. And the other characters, like the first game, have quiet footsteps and rustling sounds in the vents that give you a general idea of where they are, or if they've just moved. And on that buzzing I mentioned earlier, while the giant animatronic standing right in front of you should be enough to get your attention, it also is accompanied by a sort of creepy ambience to drive that point home. Again, the audio is all tied to some gameplay aspect. And we can't forget the jump scare. Completely different from the first game, and it sounds a lot more human. Now, unlike the first game's jump scare sound, there's not a lot to note here, that I know of at least, besides the center of the whole freedom theory I discussed earlier. It's effective and serves its purpose, but that's about it. Okay, let's talk about the ambience for a second. Because it doesn't have as many weird red herrings, it feels a lot less dense, and a lot less deep also. It sounds less droney and is a little bit quieter. To me, it seems a little more grounded. It sounds like actual office ambience, like a loud air conditioner or some plumbing in the background. It's a lot more high-pitched. While FNaF 1's ambience felt like a fear fest, FNaF 2, because there's so much more going on, it would make sense that it would offset that by, when things aren't going on, having a lot calmer and quieter ambience. It's still creepy, just less packed. Now, compared to the first game, I think this game just looks a lot less scary. That doesn't mean the game isn't scary, but it just means it packs a lot less of a punch. So instead, I just want to talk about some standout sequences and some cool designs. Your office feels a lot less claustrophobic in this game, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's less scary. I mentioned in the first game that the doors feel very protective. They feel like a good line of defense. However, despite looking more high-tech than the first game, the flimsy flashlight and mask do not make you feel safe at all. Instead, you feel completely exposed the entire time, which makes it really scary. The fear of the second game feels less like being stuck in a small space, and more like the fear of being in the middle of the ocean with nothing around. At any moment, something can come for you from the depths. The characters in this game are just not scary, to me at least. They still capture that uncanny valley feeling, but they just don't creep me out as much. The toys, while still definitely feeling very off, still feel like their namesake, toys. I will say though, Toy Bonnie sliding across the screen you put your mask on is really creepy. And then there's the Wizards and Mangle. Now, instead of feeling too sleek or clean, they feel too destroyed. I know a lot of people were really scared by Withered Bonnie, but he felt like he was just trying too hard to me. I still think the designs are cool. I think Withered Freddy is my favorite iteration of Freddy, and Withered Bonnie is pretty badass. But they're just a little too over the top for me to find them scary. With one exception. Withered Chica. I don't know why, I don't know what it is, but Withered Chica is fucking terrifying to me. Literally probably the scariest animatronic in the whole series, for me at least. She's reminiscent of a fucked up scarecrow and is legitimately scary to me after all these years. The missing hands, unhinged jaw, and terrifying eyes. It's amazing. The renders in this game are actually really interesting because they're a lot more packed, with different characters showing up in the same room a lot more. But aside from some cool imagery, there's not a lot there. Unlike in FNaF 1, where it was very difficult to make out who was where, as long as you use the flashlight and the camera, it's pretty easy to keep track of everyone. Not that you'll be doing much of that in later nights, instead just using the camera to wind up the music box. Holy Mary, Mother of God. This is when the Five Nights at Freddy's story and secrets went off the deep end. But before we get into that, let's talk about some less important Easter eggs and secrets, starting with some hidden characters. Very rarely you can see this bare endoskeleton either in the prize corner or in your vent. He can't actually attack you, but apparently he can block other characters from entering the vent, meaning he's actually an asset to the player. Exactly his lore relevance or meaning is not entirely known, and it's possible he's just a fun Easter egg. There's also a couple hallucination characters, Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie. Shadow Freddy rarely appears in the parts and service room and will crash your game if you look at him for too long. I also want to point out that I believe I was one of the first people on YouTube to have encountered this, uploading my video with the encounter literally one day after the game's release. Shadow Bonnie, later known as RWQFSFASXC, will appear in the office at times, and I believe it will crash your game as well, but I'm not 100% sure. And then there's the more minor Easter eggs. The puppet hallucination in the hall and the paper plate doll from Party Room 4 disappearing and then reappearing in your office. Oh, and JJ. I don't know what's up with her. She's down there. There's also the rare death screens and opening screens, much like the first game, with just sort of dark, eyeless versions of the characters. And then, in between nights, you get these sort of cutscene where you're from Freddy's perspective looking back and forth. First, it's the other animatronics looking at you, then Golden Freddy, then the puppet. Again, I'm not going to get super deep into the lore relevance of this, but I have to say, when you first boot up that game, it was shocking. But let's talk about the part you've all been waiting for, the death minigames. Now, this sort of Atari minigame style storytelling has basically become inseparable from FNaF at this point, but at the time we had never seen anything of the sort. So when you died and this happened, it was mind-blowing. Rarely, after dying, instead of being taken back to the menu, you will be transported into an Atari-style minigame. Each minigame reveals some aspect of the lore and introduces the all-important purple guy. Now, exactly how all of these fit into the lore in modern FNaF is not entirely clear, so I'm going to be taking them at face value as they appeared at the time. In this game, you play as Freddy, giving cake to various children at a party. The children get more angry the longer they've gone without cake, so it's sort of a simplified restaurant game. However, the important part is what's happening outside of the restaurant. A child stands outside crying. After a while, a car pulls up and the Purple Man steps out and seemingly kills the child and drives away. While all of this is happening, Freddy is getting slower and a creepy voice spells out the words, "Save him." Finally, the game ends with the marionette jump scaring the player. In this game, you play as Foxy, running from Pirate's Cove into a room of children who all celebrate your arrival. The third time you do this, you can see the purple man smiling in the corner, and when you reach the room of children, they're all dead. The game ends with Withered Foxy's jump scare. Here, you play as the marionette. You give out gifts to 4 dead children's bodies, and then you give them life by putting animatronic heads on them. A creepy voice reads out the text, "Help them," and when you finish giving the animatronics heads, Golden Freddy jump scares the camera and the game ends. However, there is one thing to note. On the last frame before Golden Freddy attacks, you can see a 5th child appear in the middle of the room. Here is where things get a little crazier. In this final minigame, the player, as Freddy, follows the marionette around the pizzeria with dead bodies lying in different rooms. Again, a voice spells out, "Save them." There are a couple of different ways for this to end, by either following the marionette, wandering off, or touching the dead bodies. Rarely, there's a chance you will encounter the Purple Man, who attacks Freddy and shuts off the game, but not before the words "You can't" appear. There is an absurd amount to unpack here, and I'm not going to get into it until we get to the more theory section of this video, but let's just say this. The death minigames were so insane, so packed with speculation and uncertainty, that with such a minimalist style, it's legitimately impressive how Scott Cawthon was able to tell such a dense story. Like I brought up in the beginning when going over the teasers, there was an absurd amount of hype around this game at the time. The teasers just had a way of getting into people's minds, and this is also when the theory crafting section of YouTube really started exploding. 8-Bit Gaming, Dawko, Smike, all started making videos about Five Nights at Freddy's around this time. And although this side of the community did exist before Five Nights at Freddy's 2, this is when it exploded. And this is when game theory started making theories that made any sort of sense. But before we get into that, I just want to highlight some community stuff from back then. The song that recently had a meme resurgence, "It's Been So Long," is a legitimate banger. Like, that instrumental break is fucking amazing. This is also the time where more FNaF fan music began to pop up. This is also when fan games began to be made, with Five Nights at Treasure Island, which is still the most scared I've ever been playing a game, and One Night at Flumpty's and One Night at Flumpty's 2. And then of course there was Vincent. Oh dear God. Also my introduction to the animator Diet Stab, who now does entirely different stuff, but back then that I can't decide FNaF purple guy animation slapped for my tiny baby brain. Also, while it may have been released a tad bit after FNaF 3 released, I think Pymation's 5 AM at Freddy's the prequel deserves a spot here. Alright, the theories. Now, it would be impossible to go over all of them, so instead we're just going to talk about some surrounding the death minigames and where the lore was at the time. First off, less a theory and more a confirmed fact at this point, the game is actually a prequel, not a sequel timeline-wise. We can tell for a variety of reasons, the biggest being the fact that your paycheck gives you the date 1987, a year referred to in the past tense in FNaF 1 with the bite of 87. There's also the reference of this new and improved restaurant actually being a remake of a place called Fredbear's Family Diner, which would become a very important name later in the series, but for now just meant that there was at least one location before FNaF 2. And at the end of Night 6, you're told via newspaper that the withered animatronics are going to be repurposed in a new restaurant, presumably the FNaF 1 restaurant. Now, in general, the accepted theory was that the Purple Man killed one child first, as seen in the Take Cake to the Children minigame. This child then became the puppet, and then the Purple Man strikes again. The puppet brings the children to life by having them possess the animatronics. And that's about where the agreement left off. So let's get into this shit.
Purple guy!
The introduction of a new human character was pretty big, let alone someone this iconic. So theories abound. Was there 2 purple guys, considering they're 2 different sprites? Last time I checked, this one is still up for debate. Popularized by MatPat's video, was the phone guy purple guy? Was the night guard from FNaF 1 purple guy? Was it the day shift night guard that's referenced by the phone guy? And don't get me started on what the purple guy is holding. A taser, a phone. I'm gonna be honest, I always thought it was just his big funny hand. I mean, his security badge is a different color, why wouldn't what he's holding be too? I don't know.
Was that the bite of 87?
That's right, we're back. There were plenty of possible culprits put forth. Was it the Mangle who jump scares from above right at your frontal lobe area? Was it Withered Foxy? Was it the Shadow animatronics? Some believe that the victim was the Night Guard that we play as, and the canon ending of the game is getting killed by Mangle, because we're the bite victim. or that the day shift party we're supposed to go to is where we get bit. Others thought it was the day shift guard whose position becomes mysteriously available, or maybe it's the phone guy. Wait, what? The shadow animatronics are often overlooked with the advent of the puppet and the purple guy, but they remain one of the most mysterious additions to the game. From lost souls to manifestations of the purple man to just hallucinations, because of how mysterious they are and continue to be, the theories are rather limited, especially back then. I mean, hell, I thought Shadow Freddy was just Golden Freddy when I first saw it. And then there was the theory that the Living Tombstone song was secretly canon, and that they had partnered with Scott Cawthon, which was just not even a little bit true. Alright, in the last video I made, I had a whole dedicated section to my experience, but it felt kind of redundant, so I'm just gonna go over how I fit into the community at the time, at the end of the community section. Now, my theories about the game weren't exactly the most popular thing in the world, but it was really interesting to get feedback from a community which I had never experienced before, and the views I was getting were unlike anything I had ever got before. My FNaF 2 Let's Plays never blew up, but I had a fantastic time making them. And like I said earlier, I'm pretty sure I was one of the first people to encounter Shadow Freddy on YouTube. Alright, so where does this game go on the tier list? I'm gonna have to go S tier. The first game goes up there just because it's so iconic. I mean, it's Five Nights at Freddy's 1. But the second game goes there because I legitimately think it's the best Five Nights at Freddy's game. Every aspect of the gameplay is used. It kicked off a way of storytelling that was insane at the time and still is. And it also introduced characters that are going to be important to the series forever. In my opinion, it's the quintessential Five Nights at Freddy's game. I'm sure some people would put it lower because, again, the sort of learning curve and the RNG that is introduced into it is pretty tough, but to me, I think it's the best game. After FNaF 2's release, Scott Cawthon's website was updated to offline. And then, I am still here. So, that was my retrospective on Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Next up, Five Nights at Freddy's 3. Again, I can't tell you exactly when the next one of these will be out because they take a long time to make. This one was a nostalgia trip and it brought back memories and parts of the games that I completely forgot. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe and leave a comment as to what you thought of this video. You can also suggest what I should cover next on my Twitter, and you should follow me there because that's when I update and announce when I'll be streaming at twitch.tv/SaganHawks. I'll see you all next time.